Good evening. My name is Cristiano Neto, and I reside in Canindé in the state of Ceará. Currently, I dwell in the town center, but until I reached 19, I experienced life in the deep interior of this land. Here, life no longer pulsates with such intensity, but imagine the isolation of living in the very heart of the backcountry. The biggest challenge of inhabiting such a place wasn't the distance, which was a hurdle to reach any point, but rather the water scarcity. Where we lived, there was no piped water, and obtaining this vital resource was a genuine ordeal. My father, mounted on his motorbike, would travel to the town center to buy water from an occasional water truck, filling the cistern we had in our yard. Despite these hardships, it was a place of peculiar serenity. Given the rarity of neighboring families, we often slept with windows and doors wide open, and countless times I dozed off on the porch of our house, devoid of any apprehension. Such was the remoteness of our abode. My uncle resided about 10 kilometers from our home, and one afternoon he invited us for roasted mutton in celebration of his birthday. So my father and I set off on one motorcycle, and my mother and younger brother on another. In these parts, owning motorcycles is quite common, as tackling the sandy tracks under this relentless climate and the long distances on foot or by bicycle would be practically impossible. Some local folks were gathered at my uncle's house, and I vividly recall Seu Aparecido, an old-time resident, uttering, "Have you all heard some critter running along the roads lately? For 2 nights now, I've been woken up by some awful screams in the middle of the street, and along with the screams, something racing fast down the road, kicking up dust. The first time, I even thought it was one of those donkeys that roam freely around here, but those cries that come with it aren't from any known animal." "Now that you mention it, Seu Aparecido," my uncle said, "something comes to mind. Last week, I was passing near the house where the late Raimundo Campos used to live, already at dusk, when I heard someone humming softly. At that instant, I thought, could someone be living in the deceased's house? And I went up to the front door when I saw a young woman emerge from behind and disappear into the thicket beside it. I considered calling out, but who knows? Maybe the woman has a husband and he'd get the wrong idea. Afterwards, I went to set some traps further ahead after the bend, and when I was returning around 7 in the evening, I just saw this galloping within the woods, branches snapping. I'll tell you one thing, if that had been a donkey, it would be all scratched up today, and whether it would even be alive is questionable, because only something made of steel could run like that, breaking everything. The thorns in those woods are almost as big as my finger, and the creature that was running didn't even seem to feel them." Then Seu Aparecido spoke. "That's the Besta Fera. I've heard tales about it. They say it's a regular girl during the day, but at night the girl transforms into a mule and bolts down the roads, terrifying people. Besta Fera, Padre's mule, headless mule. Those are the names the old folks gave it." Some men who worked with my uncle and were drinking cachaça started laughing after Seu Aparecido spoke. "That doesn't exist there," they said. "That must be just some donkey scaring the locals, Seu Aparecido." But my father didn't laugh at all. He immediately turned serious, as he had always taught me to listen to the elders. As the sun began to set, he promptly called my mother so we could leave, and I knew it was because of Seu Aparecido's story. My father wouldn't risk traveling at night and coming face to face with such a beast. We returned home swiftly, and soon night fell. I strung my hammock on the porch, and my father immediately said, "Son, sleep out there, don't sleep inside the house. Your father is worried about that story, son. I'll teach you something. When in doubt, it's best not to take chances." Several days passed, and the turn of the year from 1996 to 1997 arrived. My uncle invited us to spend it at his house. There was a big party, and many of our relatives were there that night. My father had started drinking early and was already quite tipsy when my uncle said, "Now let's see who drew whom." There was going to be a secret Santa, a gift exchange game very common in these parts. Then my father exclaimed, "Darn it, I forgot the present back home," and got up to take the motorbike and go get it, but my uncle said, "You're not going anywhere." Like that. "Let me go get it. Give me the key." So I offered to go along, and the two of us went to my house to fetch the gift. It was 10 kilometers there, along a very dark dirt road with woods on either side. We were traveling at just over 50 kilometers per hour on the motorbike, as the road had fine sand that made it easy to skid. We reached our property, and I got off to open the gate. My uncle rode through on the motorbike and headed towards the house, saying, "I'm going to leave you here alone," and rode off laughing. When I turned to go to the house, I looked towards the cistern, which was on the side, and just saw this blur passing on the other side of the fence. I ran and told my uncle, who grabbed the motorbike and shone the light in the direction I had indicated. Then he took the house keys out of his pocket and told me to go get the present my father had forgotten. I went in, grabbed it, and immediately ran back and hopped on. Then we went through the gate again, and I got off to close it. I could see that my uncle was worried. That's when we heard a scream, coming directly from the direction where I had seen the blur. In the place where I lived, silence reigned, and you could hear any noise, even from afar. When we heard the scream, it was so loud that I almost wet my pants. I remember my uncle saying, "What devilry is that?" When we looked, we saw an animal emerging from the other side and running towards us. This blur came crashing through dry branches and everything in its path. My uncle dropped the motorbike, opened the gate and closed it again. We ran to my house, opened the door, and watched from the window. The animal, from there to here on the fence side, was hitting its hooves against the posts, trying to knock them down, and every so often it let out a horrible scream each time it tried to break down the fence. We stayed like that for a long time, until we saw the light of 3 motorbikes arriving. When the animal saw them, it took off running, crashing through undergrowth, branches, and screaming. When the motorbikes arrived, it was my mother and 2 cousins who had come to see what had happened. We told them everything, and everyone was scared to return to my uncle's house. But we ended up going back there. We told everyone what had attacked us, and I remember that party night ending right then and there. Everyone was afraid to go home and stayed at my uncle's house until daybreak. I remember my father going with his brother to the house of the late Raimundo Campos and breaking the rest of the window that was still there and going inside. But there was no sign that anyone was living there. For many nights, the locals heard the galloping in the early morning of an animal passing by, but no one dared to open the door and see what it really was. The women of the region even held a morning rosary, praying to ward off bad things, but for a long time, people heard that demon on the roads. Thank God we managed to buy land closer to the center, and today we live peacefully. We occasionally visit my uncle's house, but only in the morning. To return in the afternoon, God forbid I ever live in that place again, because even today, people still get chills when they hear galloping in the middle of the night. Good night. Good evening, my name is Luis Fernando. I am 34 years old and I live in the countryside of Vitoria, in the state of Espírito Santo. I toiled for some years in a furniture warehouse where some truly eerie things transpired, which I shall recount here. It all commenced when I was transferred from an educational institution to this depot, as all the security guards who were assigned there ended up requesting transfers or even resigning outright. They claimed that strange occurrences manifested there during the night, such as wails, the sound of people pacing around the grounds, children's voices, and even phantoms of old men who would halt in front of the guardhouse, beckoning the watchman to come down. It was a genuine torment for anyone who worked there. However, I never harbored fear towards such things, so I declared that, given a better wage, I would accept the transfer without hesitation. I eventually received that pay raise, along with 3 other colleagues who were stationed at different sites. It had already been over a month since the 4 of us had been working there, and we had witnessed absolutely nothing. We even mocked the former guards for succumbing to fear in a place where the sole audible sound was that of the wind whipping through the nearby trees. Yet, this fleeting tranquility would yield to nights of intense dread in that September. It was a frigid night, and each of us occupied our designated post, maintaining a considerable distance from one another. I was stationed in the rear guardhouse of the warehouse. Another colleague was at the front guardhouse, and the remaining 2 alternated on foot patrols throughout the premises. I had descended to use the restroom, situated about 30 meters away. I entered the enclosure and shut the door. Scarcely had I turned around when I perceived 3 distinct knocks directly behind me, so I exclaimed, "I'll be out in a moment. I just stepped in." Nevertheless, 3 more knocks echoed. I said once more, "I'll be out shortly." And as soon as I closed my mouth, I heard a forceful impact against the door, like a kick, which I don't even know how it didn't shatter the lock. I flung the door open immediately, but I didn't espy anyone. I glanced around and there was nothing, and there weren't many places to conceal oneself, as I would have heard hurried footsteps. I activated the radio, inquiring of each person their whereabouts, and none of them were even near the lavatory. So I proceeded to the front guardhouse and requested to view the footage from the cameras of the preceding 10 minutes. I observed attentively, and indeed, none of them were responsible for the kick and the thumps. In fact, I saw absolutely no one on the recordings. I recounted to them what had transpired, and they burst into laughter, insinuating that I was afraid of the wind. I ended up taking it in stride. The night wore on, and the strange occurrences began to befall each of those present. One of the guards came running to where I was, asserting that he had heard a voice utter, "Help me." He surmised it was me or one of the other colleagues present, so he yelled, "I'm going to shoot you in the shins, so you'll stop bothering us." But the voice retorted, "But I'm already dead." Then, upon looking, he beheld an old woman standing, staring intently at him, who then fled and arrived pallid near where I was. Once again, we went to scrutinize the cameras, but there was no old woman, only the guard fleeing from something that only he witnessed. We resolved to remain close to one another and attempt to find an explanation for what was transpiring there. It was nearing 2 in the morning when we commenced to hear the voice of a boy pleading for assistance from outside. The rear of this warehouse abuts a thicket of tall trees, so another colleague and I ascended a ladder to ascertain which boy might be there. When we looked, there was indeed a child in the undergrowth, but he was ashen, as if deceased, without a doubt. We descended the ladder, and our desire was to depart, as things were only worsening. That was merely the first night of several in which we beheld inexplicable things there. On one of those nights, I was dining and began to perceive swift footfalls from afar. I peered through the guardhouse window and discerned nothing, only heard the footsteps approaching, but there was no one there. When the footsteps arrived very close to where I was, they ceased as if someone were right in front of me. Then I heard a giggle, one of those of a little girl, and the footsteps running behind a wall. And when I looked, there was a small girl, in a white dress, gazing at me with such a macabre stare that I nearly fainted from the fright. The other guards witnessed doors opening, chairs turning on their own, voices calling their names. It reached the point where one of the guards brought candles to leave lit at night to see if the hell of those things that appeared there would cease. When the front guard took vacation, another came in his stead, who was evangelical, and he began to hear the things there. He, whenever he arrived, would offer a prayer to replant the bad things that were there, and there were nights when we saw nothing. We would do anything to avoid having to see the things that seemed to dwell there. Candles, prayer, supplication, everything was valid. It wasn't always that there were strange things there. But when they did appear, it was enough to scare someone to death. I still worked some years in that place. Then I was transferred to a health post. To this day, some guards see strange things there. I hope never to have to return there, for that place seems to be a little piece of hell here on Earth. Good night.